Look, I get it when it comes to Jamel Dean. A lot of people want him out of town, and the Bucs can save about $8 million on the salary cap if they release him. And as Bill Parcells once famously said, the most important ability is availability. But I'll disagree with Coach Parcells. I think the most important ability is people skills because nobody wants to be around Jeff when he makes everyone feel awkward and he smells funny. Hey, Bucs fans, this is Josh Queipo with Pewter Report. I'm back with another off-season deep dive into the Bucs. Hope you liked my last video, and I want to say I really appreciate a lot of the comments. In that video, we went over the Bucs' current players. We broke them down by, who's a lock to make the roster, who's a bubble player, who are the pending free agents. I gave you a little bit of a glimpse into my valuations for those players. And like I said, I just want to thank y'all for the comments that you left. I know a lot of you think O'Keefe, he's a lock to make the roster next year. I think even somebody said something about Devin Culp, and all really great feedback. But now we're going to move into the next video in the series. We're going to talk about how do the Bucs create more cap space, because where we left it in the last video, we talked about taking the projected salary cap, taking out the top 51 cap hits that the team has to account for in the offseason, adding in the dead cap hits from expired contracts, accounting for the rookie pool from the draft class, and even incorporating the rollover space from 2024. The team is still sitting kind of at a point where they're going to be about $500,000 over the salary cap. So we're going to take that as our jumping off point. We're going to move right into what cap maneuvers can the team create in order to create more cap space so that they can add to the roster. So before we get into the cap maneuvers tab, I'm actually going to move right on over to the re-signings or extensions for veteran contracts. We're going to talk about 2 receivers on the Bucs roster. So this starts with not Mike Evans actually, but this starts with Chris Godwin. So Godwin is a pending free agent, but he's also set to count almost $19 million against the Bucs' 2025 salary cap, and that's because the team pushed out some of his salaries in the form of prorated bonuses over the life of his last deal, which was from 2022 to 2024. And what this has done is it's created a scenario where technically the prorations of those bonuses sit right now in 2025, 2026, and 2027 at $7.5, $7.5, and $3.8 million respectively. The problem is you'll notice there's no base salary for those years because they're what's called void years. What happens is as soon as the contract voids, which is set to be on February 20th, these 2 years cap hits move into this year, accelerate into 2025, and they all come together, to become an $18,852,000 dead cap hit for the Bucs. Now, we accounted for that in our last video as part of the dead cap hits that the team's going to have to account for. But there is a scenario where the team can save up to $5.5 million based on the scenario that I lay out here against the 2025 cap by extending Godwin before February 20th. Here's what I proposed. A 3-year, $57 million contract extension. $38 million of that is guaranteed. All right. And I'm going to walk you through what that looks like and how it helps the 2025 salary cap. So let's start with just the cash flows. This is something that's very important to players, and it's something fans don't really pay attention to. I'm not asking you to go become a cap expert. That's what I do. But for the purposes of this, we're going to talk about the Bucs pay out Godwin $19 million per year each of the 3 years of the contract. How does that $19 million roll out in 2025 is very important when we're talking about Godwin's cap hit. So what I propose, $2.5 million base salary. That's fully accounted for in the 2025 salary cap, or his salary cap number. And then a $16.5 million prorated bonus. Now this gets prorated over 5 years. So what that means is each of those 5 years, it's split evenly for salary cap purposes. So in 2025, the Bucs only have to account for $3.3 million of that $16.5 million against the salary cap. Then another $3.3 million goes into 2026, 2027, so on, and even into 2028 and 2029, which become void years, very similar to what we are seeing with his current deal. Okay? So you've got a $2.5 million base salary, a $3.3 million prorated accounting for a $16.5 million bonus, and the original prorations from his current deal stay locked into those years. So the $7.5 million in 2026 stays in 2026. The $3.8 million in 2027 stays in 2027. And the team only has to account for that very first $7.5 million, along with the $2.5 million base, along with the $3.3 million proration of the new bonus. When you add these three numbers up, you get a cap hit of $13.334 million that replaces the $18.852 million cap hit that he would have had as a dead cap, and the team saves $5.5 million on the 2025 salary cap. Oh, and by the way, they also have Chris Godwin under contract as opposed to not having him under contract. The second receiver let's talk about is everybody's favorite, future Hall of Famer, Mike Evans. Now, Evans is not scheduled to be a free agent in 2025. The Bucs have him under contract, and you can see that here. He's got a $21 million base salary. The team has to account for $4.4 million in a prorated bonus they paid out to him last year, and then another $667,000 bonus that he earned from some of his contract incentives. So his current cap hit is set to be $26 million, and he's due $21 million in cash. The cash is important for this next scenario, but I figured out a way where the team can potentially save almost $16 million on the cap and secure Mike Evans' services for another year. And that's with a 1-year, $23 million extension. What does that look like? Well, let's take his base salary. Let's reduce it from $21 million to $1.5 million. Let's pay him out a $22 million bonus, which, again, prorates over 5 years. Once they've done that, that bonus is only $4.4 million accounted for on the 2025 cap. When you add that, plus the $1.5 million base salary and the $4.4 million prorated bonus that was already attached to 2025, you get a new cap hit of $10.3 million. Well, that's almost $16 million less than what he was scheduled to be. Why would Mike Evans do this? A lot of people think he just does it for the love of the game or the love of the team. Well, there's something in it for him too. His cash payment goes from $21 million to $23.5 million in 2025. So this effectively works like a small little pay bump from Evans, helps the Bucs on the cap, and it technically secures his services for 2026 with a $20.5 million base salary and a $29 million cap hit, $29.25. But his salary is not guaranteed, and therefore, if he decides to retire after 2025, the team could reduce his salary and save up to $20.5 million with a post-June 1st cut or retirement. Okay, so 2 moves for 2 very good wide receivers can save the Bucs a little over $21 million, and that's where we start our journey. All right, so I've got both the Godwin and the Evans extensions right here. If you add them up, it's a little over $21.25 million worth of possible cap savings. You'll notice I color-coded them a little differently. The Evans extension, I see that as likely. We're going to call that Pewter. It's light gray, but we're going to call it Pewter. I learned from the last video. The Godwin extension, while I think that Godwin comes back to the Bucs in 2025, I don't think that they necessarily work out a deal before February 20th, and I do think that that dead cap hit will end up hitting the Bucs books, and then they'll just do a new deal. Okay, so I don't think that the $5.5 million in cap savings for Godwin's extension is likely. I do think that the Evans extension is likely. And if you take that and add it to the $400,000 and change that the Bucs were set to be over the cap, you've got a new cap space number of $20.8 million. The Bucs can also restructure some of their veteran contracts. I've got 4 on here, 3 that are, I think, could be likely, 1 that's not. Tristan Wirfs, the team could restructure his contract, save almost $20 million. Antoine Winfield Jr., they could save almost $15 million. Baker Mayfield, they could save $21.5 million. Heck, even Chase McLaughlin, they can save $1 million. You'll notice one name I don't have on here is Vita Vea. While the Bucs could save some money by restructuring Vea's contract, they chose not to last year, and that makes me feel like they probably won't do it again this year. So I just left him off there, but technically speaking, there is that opportunity. But if you add up these 4 players, you get another $57.5 million in savings, and that could take the Bucs up to over $78.3 million if they get the Godwin extension and the Evans extension done as well. I'm going to stop right here and tell you, not all of these moves are going to be done. They're not going to clear up all this cap space. We call that being the Saints, and Bucs fans know you don't want to be the Saints. They're in cap hell. Bucs aren't going to put themselves in cap hell. These are all possible moves that could be done and are likely to be done dependent on other moves. I see all of these as being possible, whereas some of the Vita Vea one, I just don't think that that's something they're willing to do. But they're not going to do all of these. They could do any of these. So we'll move into potential cuts. Jamel Dean, Jordan Whitehead, both had disappointing seasons. A lot of it was injury related. Both present cap savings for the Bucs. If you did both of them together, you're looking at almost $13 million in savings. Whitehead being 4.5, Dean being 8.25. There are pros and cons to keeping Jamel Dean. I think Bucs fans saw what happened when he wasn't on the field, and Tyreek Thunderberg and Josh Hayes just weren't it. He's a good player when he's on the field, as frustrating as he has been for a lot of fans. I know I've seen some people say, well, just rework his contract and force him to take a pay cut. I don't think that's likely with Dean, because if he were cut, I could see him getting more than the $12 million that he's due in cash from the Bucs on a deal with another team. So there's no incentive for him to reduce his salary, because he could get a better deal on the free agent market. So it's unlikely that that happens. I do think that both players probably get cut, though. And then lastly, we'll talk about 3 players from the 2022 draft class that could be extended this offseason. And that's right tackle Luke Gedeke, tight end Cade Otton, and cornerback Zion McCollum. So let's take a look at each of those deals. We'll start with Gedeke. My valuations of him have him projected for a 5-year, $7.5 million extension. Comes out to $21.5 million per year is kind of where I see him right now. And so we'll take a look at it. Currently, this is what he's set to count against the cap in 2025 under his current rookie deal. Okay, the Bucs would be wise to extend Gedeke this offseason, because he's only going to get more expensive in 2026 with a rising salary cap. But if they were able to do an extension like this, I've kind of set out what that could look like. Now, I'm not going to go into all the details like I did with Evans and with Godwin, but suffice to say that they could arrange this to where his cap hit in 2025 is only a little over $4.7 million versus $3.7 million under his current deal. So he would only cost the team about $1 million in 2025 salary cap, while then becoming a $16 million cap in 2026, then $22 million, $22.5, $24, and then finally $22 million in 2030. Okay. With Otton, I have his valuation at 4 years, $13 million. And feel free to pause this video if you want to look through all the different years and boxes and whatnot. And you can leave questions, in terms of what each box means. But the nuts and bolts of this is Otton's currently $3.7 million cap hit. And you're looking at the Bucs could get him for 4 years at a $13 million APY and really only spend an extra $500,000 in salary cap in 2025. And then McCollum, who I think is probably the least likely to get signed, because there's a world where if he does well in 2025, he can improve this $14.5 million average annual salary estimation to over $20 million. And I think that he probably looks to try and maximize that value. But if the Bucs and McCollum were able to come together on this type of deal, his cap hit goes from 3.4 million to 5.2 million in 2025. So we come back over here and you see, let's say the Bucs get all three of those done. It only costs them about $3.25 million in cap space. And if they were to do all of these moves we just talked about, well, they would have $87.8 million in cap space to then go out and improve the team. Once again, they're not the Saints. They're not going to do all of this. I've kind of put what I think is a little bit more likely, a little bit less likely. But let's look at those likely moves all together. All right. So you got the Evans extension. I only put Tristan Wirfs and Antoine Winfield Jr. restructures. Those are the only two. I kept Baker and I kept McLaughlin out. Cut Dean, cut Whitehead, extend Gedeke, and extend Cade Otton. And the Bucs are sitting with $61.3 million in cap space. Now let's tie this back in with my last video, where we said there were certain free agents that were more likely to be re-signed. And I took all of those, and I even added in Levante David, who I had as a neutral. But let's say David comes back. Well, Levante on a 1 year, $7.25 million APY. Well, the Bucs would probably just eat all of that in 1 year. I don't think they prorate much of that. Chris Godwin on that 3 year, $57 million deal. His cap hit in year one, even if they don't do the extension before February 20th, and they let all that dead cap hit from the last contract, they just absorb it, you could still see him at as low as a $4.75 million cap hit. Ben Bredesen at $4 million, Kyle Trask at $4 million, Greg Gaines at $2 million, and Justin School at $1.5 million. All of those, the Bucs would probably just do 1 year deals for each and absorb all of those as just immediate cap hits, no proration, no dead money in the future. Well, that's $23.5 million worth of cap space that they would use. Effectively, it's actually only $18.5 million because each of those players would replace one of the bottom players on their 51 accounting, who each already account for $840,000 against the cap. So with each of these, you'll notice we've taken off $840,000, taken off $840,000, because that's already accounted for, and they're just replacing one of those players. So in total, those 6 players only count for about $18.5 million additional against the Bucs salary cap, and the team would still have about $43 million left over to go pursue external talent, which is plenty of cap space to look at an edge rusher, to look at a linebacker, to look at a cornerback, to look at a guard, what have you. Still plenty of money to go and play in the big kids pool when it comes to free agency. And that's really where the Bucs are, the big kids pool. 5 straight playoff appearances, 4 straight divisional titles. They've made it to the divisional game or the divisional round of the playoffs multiple times in the last 5 years, the Super Bowl, and they've come out of that Brady era, successfully transitioned to the Baker era, and they've got a very talented young roster that's ready to win, but it does need some additional talent. And they're going to need to work in free agency. Does that mean they're going to get every high-price free agency out there or free agent that's out there? No, they're not going to do that. But as you can see here today, they can free up plenty of space. We went through the likely, roster moves or cap moves that they can do and found $43 million. There's more moves that they can make. They could restructure Vita Vea. They could restructure Baker Mayfield. So they could sign Chris Godwin before his contract tolls, and all of those give them additional cap savings. They're not going to do all of it. Don't pretend like they are. I will find you, okay? But they will do just enough to bring in the free agents that they really want to pursue, that they feel will bolster the roster. And the great thing is there's no free agent. There's no 2 free agents. There's no 3 free agents out in this market in 2025 that the Bucs could not add if they really wanted to. They've got the cap space to do it. They're in a healthy position. because they've been able to maneuver well out of that Brady era. They were able to take their lumps for a year or two, find some cheap value deals, and they've built this really great roster around young drafted talent. And now they've got the ability to create cap space to augment and to add. And that's kind of where we're going to leave off on this video. In our next video, we'll talk a little bit about what are some of those external moves the Bucs can make. We'll go through some trade scenarios. We'll go through some free agent scenarios. We'll talk about how do you improve this roster and what does that look like from a cap perspective. But until then, I'm Josh Queipo for Pewter Report. Remember to like and subscribe to Pewter, like the video, subscribe to Pewter Report TV, and I'll see you next time.